Welcome back folks, my name is LastKnownMeal and today we're gonna be talking about Cyberpunk 2077, or well, more specifically we're gonna be talking about a sequel to Cyberpunk itself, because lately I've been getting a lot of questions from people asking what's gonna be happening with the future of Cyberpunk as an IP, and if we're ever getting a sequel to this game, or is CDPR completely going to abandon this world and just focus on something else. So there are some things which I think are going to happen, some things which are not going to happen, so without further wasting your time, let's get into the video. So first off, if you're gonna be looking at Cyberpunk as an IP, we have to realize one thing: it's huge. Cyberpunk 2077, prior to the release, was one of the most hyped games of all time. Now, of course, that can be contributed to CDPR and the way they were doing marketing, but even without the marketing, Cyberpunk 2077, or well, Cyberpunk written by Mike Pondsmith, was already pretty known in the circles of, for example, tabletop RPGs, or just when it comes to Cyberpunk lore in general, or how Cyberpunk future is going to look like. So when you have an IP like that, and when you have an IP which is already somewhat known in the pop culture, going from, you know, the 90s and the 80s and all of the movies and shows and games which were made back then, you're going to have a very sizable audience to consume that title or to consume that game. Now, even with the problems that Cyberpunk 2077 had with its release, it still sold really well, to the point where it brought money back which was invested and made profit for CD Projekt. So the myth that CD Projekt is right now weak, I mean, their stocks have basically nosedived, but at the same time, as a company, from the monetary and profit perspective, they're still pretty much liquid, because they're continuing to selling both Cyberpunk 2077 and The Witcher 3, but even that cannot continue until the end of time. So in the future, obviously, they have to think about other IPs and other games which are going to substitute when The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk stop selling pretty much. And also keep in mind that CD Projekt Red acquired the rights for Cyberpunk, you know, that was written by Mike Pondsmith, so now they have the rights to make whatever they want in that world. And whenever you invest so much money into that, there is no doubt that you're going to not continue working on it in the future, because it's the same thing that happened when The Witcher 3 came out and CD Projekt Red said basically that they're done with Geralt of Rivia. Then I said that we are getting the next Witcher game, because The Witcher is one of the biggest IPs that CD Projekt Red has, and it's an IP that brought them to the place where they are today. It would be extremely stupid not to go and release a game in an IP that brought them all of the money they have today. So at the same time, when you have that situation, for example, with CD Projekt, that's the same situation right now with Cyberpunk, because we are getting a new Witcher game, even though people told me that's never happening. Of course that's happening. So in the future, there is no doubt that we're gonna be getting another Cyberpunk title, but there is a catch. You see, Cyberpunk 2077 was made as this Hollywood rockstar game. It was everywhere. They had Keanu Reeves in the game, like, you know, what can go bigger than that? At the same time, they were showing ads on NBA Finals and so on and so on. So this was everywhere. This is like one of those huge high budget movies that you don't even watch, but at the same time they're everywhere you look, just because it's marketed that heavily. So Cyberpunk was one of those titles. Now in the future, I think they're going to rethink their strategy of having, for example, one of the biggest Hollywood stars to be in that game, and at the same time to have a game of that scope, because the scope of Cyberpunk was huge. It was even too much that they could chew throughout the development, and that's why you had all of those issues once the game came out, because the scope of the title was too big, and the changes they were constantly making, just, you know, they couldn't have enough time to polish all of the mechanics, because other mechanics were causing issues in the engine. So once you're in that situation, and then at the same time you're trying to downgrade the game for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and the first basically port you did was for PC, that's something you don't actually see very often in this industry, because it goes first from consoles and then it gets ported to PC. But CDPR does things the other way around, but that can cause issues which were actually caused here. So in the future, I think CD Projekt Red is still going to go for a new Cyberpunk title, not anytime soon though, because keep in mind The Witcher, the next Witcher game, is going to take most of their team, because that's going to be another big game, the AAA title. They know they have to continue making money with that throughout the years like they did with The Witcher 3, and plus they have to create a game which is going to be equally good as The Witcher 3 or better, because Witcher 3 set a standard which is going to be incredibly hard to break, even for CD Projekt. So there is going to be a title in the future, but I think it's going to be smaller, and I don't even know if it's gonna be done in the same way that Cyberpunk 2077 was done. One of those things could be that we're gonna be getting a Cyberpunk multiplayer game, which is something that CDPR was already planning. Obviously, with the release of the title, those plans have been postponed and changed for the future, but every company is going for multiplayer. It's just how it is. I already made a video where I talked about some of the changes CD Projekt Red has been making because they are going into multiplayer itself, and it actually was confirmed later on by a CDPR dev. Not that they're going into multiplayer, but that they're extending their online services and people who are gonna be hiring, you know, to go into that online multiplayer game design, which tells you basically that we're going into multiplayer a little bit. And on the other hand, if they don't go with multiplayer, I think they're gonna be going for a smaller title this time, obviously not going for a full Hollywood rockstar, you know, production where they're going to have Keanu Reeves and all of that, which I do agree with. I mean, when you think about Cyberpunk, Night City is the star of this universe. I mean, there are other towns as well in the future in America and Europe and everywhere else, but at the same time, Night City is that city where Cyberpunk 2020 is, where Cyberpunk Red is, and also where Cyberpunk 2077 is. So I doubt they're gonna be changing that location. And also when it comes to the story of V, that's done. I doubt they're gonna be extending that story further on, even though there are some, without spoiling the ending of Cyberpunk, there are some things that do have some loose ends, but I doubt they're gonna be tying it too much, and at the same time, V and his journey is over. That's pretty much it. I don't see them continuing that story if they go with another Cyberpunk game. They would rather have another story, someone else, because Cyberpunk 2077 was somewhat of a reboot of Cyberpunk 2020 because the story premise is somewhat similar, so at the same time that's basically going to be a one-off thing. And I also think they want to cut ties with everything that Cyberpunk 2077 has, so a clean slate would definitely be something they're gonna be going for. Now another thing obviously would be the actual formula of the game. So in this one they go with first person perspective, and for a lot of people, you know, it was good. For a lot of people it was, you know, bad. They want third person perspective. At the same time, when it comes to the next Cyberpunk game, I want them to try something else. Alright, you tried first person here, it was good, for me it was alright, but it wasn't utilized fully to the point where I thought it was going to be utilized. Like for example, those little immersive things, eating, drinking, sitting, just those animations which basically justify having first person only in the title. So now I do want them to try something else. I want them to try third person perspective because sadly, the files they had like prior to the prototype of the game were stolen during that hack, and it found its way on YouTube. Now I'm not gonna tell you where to find it, but it is, I think, still on YouTube, and I honestly like that formula more than I liked the formula that they have for this, you know, version of Cyberpunk 2077, where it was third person, it was utilizing the objects around you to fully create that immersion, you know, in the game itself. So in the next Cyberpunk title, I want them to go into third person. I want them to try out something else, but I still want them to stay in Night City itself. But at the same time, if we're ever gonna be getting a single player RPG Cyberpunk game, that's gonna be far into the future, and hopefully this time it's not going to be problematic. But, you know, we have to wait and see what the next Witcher game is going to be about, and is the next Witcher game going to be good or bad, because I don't want to say anything until we have the title out, or at least until we don't learn where the next Witcher game is going to be set after all. So the future of Cyberpunk, I think, is going to be alright. I don't see them actually abandoning this IP forever, just because, you know, at the same time, CD Projekt Red doesn't really have a lot of IPs. They have The Witcher and they have Cyberpunk. There has been some rumors about, you know, Thorgal the Barbarian, if I'm not wrong, but so far those are just rumors, and we are not sure if CDPR is gonna be moving into that IP at all. It would be cool though. But of course, on the Cyberpunk side, I'm sure they're gonna be supplementing this with multiplayer in the future, but when it comes to single player, we're gonna have to wait for a long time. And at the same time, we're never getting a title like Cyberpunk 2077. This was a very risky, huge move, which I don't think they're going to make in the future, but that's pretty much what I think about it. So thank you for watching. Don't forget to tell me down below what do you think about all of this, and tell me your comments and thoughts below. And at the same time, if you enjoyed this, smash that like and subscribe button, and also check us out on Twitter and Discord. This is LKM signing out. Stay classy everyone, and huge thanks to my current Patreon supporters. Bye bye.